Will Jabril Cox, Kelvin Joseph, Hunter Lipke, and Jalen Brooks make the 53-man roster for the Dallas Cowboys? All that and more in this episode of the Locked On Cowboys podcast.
You are Locked On Cowboys, your daily Dallas Cowboys podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Locked on Cowboys. Locked on Cowboys.
Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. This episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Last-minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Landon McCool. You can check him out on Twitter at McCoolBCB. Landon, the Dallas Cowboys have until 4 p.m. Eastern time on Tuesday to cut down to 53 players. It's going to be as wild as I can remember because, Landon, this roster is just so talented from top to bottom.
Yeah, there's just numbers problems everywhere you look. There's guys that you want to keep that, you feel like are in real danger of being put on the street. It's the downside to having a really great and deep roster is that you feel like you're letting go of players that you really don't want to, and then these decisions become very hard. And again, that really is the hallmark of a good team is how hard is this? How hard is this cut down day? And then made even more difficult, I think, just emotionally and kind of sorting through everything, kind of sense that it's all being done on one day. So it really makes it different.
It's going to be really hard. And the Cowboys are going to cut some really talented players and probably some players with some pretty high draft capital and some well-known players around the league. We're going to do our best to kind of project who's going to be on that roster. But rather than go name by name, we're going to just touch on some of the hot button players on this team. And we're just going to tell you how many players we think the Cowboys are kind of going to keep at each position. So let's do that first. Let's run position by position. You tell me how many players you think the Cowboys are going to keep. I will do the same. Let's start with quarterback.
Okay, so for quarterback, I have them keeping 3. I actually had them keeping 3 before.
So did I.
This makes a lot of sense that it would still make that.
Yeah, we know that one. Running back, including fullback, we're just going to combine that together. I've got 3.
I've got 4.
Okay, interesting. So you've got one more than I do right now. Wide receiver, I've got 5. What do you got?
I've got 6.
Yeah. Ooh, interesting. Okay. Again, so you're 2 over me right now. Offensive or tight ends, I'm assuming both are going to keep 4 there.
I've got 3.
Are you cutting my guy Sean McEwen?
I'm thinking he can make it through to the practice squad. I think he can.
Okay, that's fine. All right. So offensive line.
Total, I'm keeping 10.
Okay.
Do you want to break down by position? I guess.
Well, I've got 9 there, so we're back to even. So starting 5 offensive linemen: Austin Richards. I think TJ Bass is going to make your 53. Matt will let's go and one more.
I think the disparity between our two is that I have Ball on the roster as a keep onto the week 1 to put on IR, basically.
Perfect. And I think the Cowboys are going to do something like that, some chicanery going on there to make sure that they keep all the offensive linemen there. Defensive ends / edge rusher, whatever you want to call them.
I got 6. But I also think that a lot of this is going to be determined on how you're designating some of these players, because I'm including Golson as a defensive end at this point. So.
Okay, and that's fair. I have 5. 6 of you want to count Golston as a defensive end. Defensive tackles, we can run through these names really quickly. I've got Osa, Mozzie, Jonathan Hankins, Junior Fahoku, and then Neville Gallimore?
I've got Bohanna.
Okay, so again, close there. Linebackers, I've got 3.
Me too. I've got LV. Well, we don't need to go.
Well, don't spoil that one. Yeah. We got Leighton Van Der Esch made the team.
Yeah. Van Der Esch made the team. Yeah.
Cornerback,
I have 5.
I've got 5 as well. Safety,
6
for me, and then I've got 4 special teams players that are eventually going to make the roster. Your kicker, your punter, your long snapper, and CJ Goodwin, who will never leave this team. What do you got?
I think again, this is really where the disparity between my list is a initial 53-man roster projection,
Yeah.
so it includes the kind of finagling. So I only have 2 guys on my initial list because Sieg and Goodwin are
Yeah.
guys that are vested veterans. So I guess 4 would be the answer.
All right. So let's talk about some players that are right on the bubble. And the way that I want to do this is I want to talk about whether they're going to finish on the 53-man roster by the end of the week. Because as you mentioned, there's going to be some guys that are going to jump on and off because they're vested veterans. I expect Brian Anger to be one of those guys. Trent Sieg, the Cowboys long snapper, they'll probably get cut, be brought back the next day so they can put Overshawn. Yep, good one. So they can put Overshawn on the injured reserve list. Maybe the same for John Stevens, who the Cowboys have not moved yet. So let's start with Jabril Cox because I think he's a fascinating one. You and I don't have him currently on our 53-man rosters, correct?
Yeah, I do want to throw in one correction real quick. With Cox, like I have him on the roster just because I've flopped back and forth so many times. And honestly, between Cox and Harper, I think I can't decide which I think would clear waivers. I think that I want both on my team, but I also want to cut one of them to try to make them through waivers, and I can't decide which one it is. So there's that element. I do want to throw in Overshown and Stevens and Durden. I'm pretty sure that they can IR those guys without having to carry them. I could be wrong, but I was looking through the rules yesterday, and I think you only need to have them on your week 1 roster if they are IR for return.
Okay.
And I don't think Overshown and Stevens Jr. specifically are.
That's something.
Well, actually, they're all left ACL injuries, aren't they? So I think all of those guys we don't have to account for on our initial roster. So just throwing that out there.
Back to the linebacker conversation.
Yes.
This one's fascinating because
tough,
I've gone back and forth.
Yeah.
I'm of the belief that Devin Harper would be easier to have clear waivers because he did not play at all in the regular season last year. I don't believe because of an injury. Jabril Cox was a former 4th-round pick who does have NFL experience, who played at a big school at LSU, went to the Senior Bowl. I just think a lot of people are going to know him. Having said that, I think the Cowboys are more likely just to keep Harper because I think they view him as a tier above Jabril Cox. So, hey, we'll cut Jabril Cox. If he can make it back to the practice squad, fantastic. But we can't afford to lose another core special teams player like Devin Harper.
I agree. I would phrase it like this. I think Harper is currently more valuable to the Cowboys. I think, but he's also the more likely of the two to clear waivers, right? To get through and make it to the practice squad. So I have them, taking the gambit, keeping Cox, and then trying to hold their breath that Harper makes it through. But honestly, like I don't feel super convicted about it. I'm going back and forth a lot of times. Like, well, who cares about his pedigree? We need Harper's special teams, and I feel like I'm going back and forth on this a lot. So I can only imagine.
It's one of the ones I'm going to be so fascinated by. I also wonder, like, is there a chance the Cowboys cut one of these two, probably Jabril Cox, and just look at the waiver wire for a linebacker? Somebody who has a little bit more experience that could maybe help you on rundowns because. That's a pretty shallow position if you only go into the year with 3.
I think the other option too is that they just cut one of these guys and then wait on Malik Jefferson to get healthy. They really like him a lot.
He played well in the preseason before he got hurt.
He did. And he's a different kind of player than those two. Like he's actually one of the few guys who's actually like a closest to a true Mike linebacker. So, maybe that's another option as well.
Let's talk about some other players that could potentially make or maybe miss the 53-man roster, including a former 2nd-round pick from the 2021 NFL draft. We will get to that next. This episode is brought to you by Gametime. Buying tickets to your favorite events shouldn't be stressful. Gametime is the fastest and the easiest way to buy tickets for sports, music, comedy, and theater near you. With killer deals on last-minute tickets and their best price guarantee, you can stop stressing over the tickets and start getting hyped for the fun that you'll have. I absolutely love the Gametime app because my favorite thing about it, when you go to look at a game, it'll show you exactly what your seats look like. So you don't have to stress about, okay, is this a good seat? Is it a bad seat? What is my view going to look like? I was looking at some Bills Cowboys tickets, trying to get in the end zone. It's so nice. Plus, another one of my favorite little things about it It shows you the all-in price. Other apps you get tricked into with some of the, fees and taxes. Now I know exactly how much I'm going to pay for the tickets. It's absolutely incredible. You can buy your tickets in a matter of seconds, 2 taps in your set. The other thing that I really like is the tickets are sent directly to your phone. Now you don't have to scroll through your email while you're waiting in line to scan your code. It's right there, so easy to use. Snag the tickets without the stress with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKDOWNNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, all you have to do is create an account, redeem code LOCKDOWNNFL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. Everydayers, on tomorrow's show, we're going to talk about all the cuts that the Cowboys made on Tuesday. We'll talk about any trades that go down. We know there's going to be a lot of roster movement happening over the next 48 hours or so. So make sure you are tuned in here to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. Lane, I want to ask you about Kelvin Joseph. He's been a player that's been mentioned a lot about a potential cut. I know our guy, Michael Gelkin, believes he's not going to make the 53-man roster. I've seen Todd Archer say that he will. What's your read in this situation?
I hate to see my two uncles in the beat writing room argue with each other. I trust Gelkin as much as any beat writer in the game. Archer is honestly the only guy that is close, right?
Too, yep.
But I just have a hard time with this whole Jordan Lewis, Kelvin Joseph situation. Like it just seems so clear that you've seen Joseph, just getting better and better. And look, is he ready to go out there and start at nickel? Not right away, but I think you're seeing a player who's improved a lot, is playing a much better football, who is a key part of your special teams units. Who's playing a little bit more versatile, has played kind of inside. He obviously can play outside. They showed him in sort of like a nickel linebacker kind of role almost at times in the game.
In the box, yep.
I just feel like it makes too much sense when you have a roster mechanism available to you with Jordan Lewis to not use it, and especially since the quotes that came out in Todd Archer's article today were like, yeah, I'd still love to have another week of not practice, just another week of rehab to get better. And it's like, if you're needing another week of rehab and then another week of practice, like you're already halfway to the pup time. So what are we doing here?
That's what I don't get. Like, you have this roster mechanism available to you to make it so you don't have to rush him back. At the same time, I get why Jordan Lewis probably wants to be back, as he sees all these cornerbacks on this roster, and he feels like, if I don't hurry up and get back, my spot might be gone. But man, it just seems like it's so convenient just to stash him on PUP. We'll see you in October when we need you.
I just feel like, I'm not his agent and I'm not Jordan Lewis, and I can't speak to another man's career, but it feels like it's a better situation for him to get fully healthy before he tries to hop on the field.
Yes.
Because look, even if he gets healthy, even if he gets put back on, and he gets thrown on the field and he looks bad, like he could get cut and then not play on another team for a while, right?
Yeah.
This is a better situation to stay on the team, get fully healthy, and then put your best, no pun intended, foot forward when it's time for him to come back. So yeah, I just, it doesn't. And when we say that this is a roster mechanism available to him, like this is the only way that you can use this roster mechanism. Yeah. And Jordan Lewis is the only person who's eligible for PUP. So to not use it, to not get a free roster spot and help your elder, defensive back get another extra 4 weeks of healing from a traumatic injury, it's so counterintuitive. I'm really having a hard time with it.
As for Kelvin Joseph, I would like to see him make the 53-man roster, because the Cowboys stuck with him in the first 2 years when he was not playing well and was inactive some games. You know that he can be somebody that can contribute on special teams. And now I think he's somebody that can actually help you on defense as a backup slot corner. I would love for the Cowboys to stick with him. I think he's been excellent in the preseason. I think he's been a little bit up and down in training camp, but at the same time, you're going up against some pretty good receivers. I wonder if the Cowboys aren't trying to flip him for like a late round conditional pick, because the other down roster corners on your team just don't have any trade value. Like, nobody's trading for Eric Scott, or nobody's trading for Nashawn Wright. But Kelvin Joseph, because he is a former second-round pick, I could see a team like Baltimore, who's having a ton of cornerback issues, being like, you know what, we'll give a conditional 6 for this, guy that was a former 5-star recruit.
Yeah, I mean, look, I just think that he's shown you enough, and he's young enough still, and he still has enough, talent. I just think that you're seeing some of the stupid mental stuff go out the window. Look, he had that offsides penalty, obviously, but I just think that it's gotten better, and he's progressing in the right direction, and he's just so physically talented.
Yeah.
I'm willing to continue to bet on that, especially again since he is, while you're continuing to develop it, he is, if not your second best, then maybe growing into being your best special teams player. So,
And again,
it's worth it.
I know the preseason doesn't really matter, but he was the Cowboys' highest graded defender in the preseason, I think on a minimum of 20 snaps. And he had 8 targets, gave up 20 total yards. It's like it's finally starting to click for him a little bit. I wish the Cowboys could exercise a little bit of patience, but at the same time, they've got some
It's
other
tough.
they've got some other down roster corners that they like quite a bit. I want to go through a couple of defensive players before we get to the offensive side of the ball. A sneaky one for me is Junior Fajoku. I think he's going to make the 53-man roster, but I wouldn't be shocked if he is somebody who is a little bit of a surprise cut.
Maybe. I just think that, and I think it has everything to do with the fact that he just missed so much time with the injury, and they kind of just didn't give him a volume of tape, basically.
Yep.
But the tape that he put out there when he was out there was really good. I was again watching the tape last night, and he was just so active and just, is constantly moving and constantly in pursuit. And I could really see why Quinn really likes a guy like this. And honestly, I think that Quinn being such a fan of his is what's going to keep him on this team. Yeah, but I again, he's at the very bottom of my list simply because not because he's played poorly or anything, just because he missed so much time in the middle of training camp, and it just didn't give him a lot to show.
I'm going to mention another name really quickly. Chauncey Golston. You and I are both big fans of him. I've seen some well-respected beat writers keep him off the 53-man roster, even as of today. I don't get that one, but maybe we're wrong here.
Yeah, I don't get that one either. Yeah, maybe we are wrong, but I don't know. He plays good football, and he's gotten better than he was last year. He's splitting double teams now. I mean, he's even making. I saw him making plays as a defensive end again. Last week. So, I think Golston is maybe in that list, but I really don't feel like he should be.
I mean, the only thing that I can say is he was playing later in some of these preseason games than I expected. But we've talked about this before. They just, because they have so many guys at the top, they have to play somebody. And there's a couple of defensive tackles that are at the bottom of the roster that are so bad that they kind of mess everything else up for the rest of the defense. So you kind of have to have somebody like Neville Gallimore and Chauncey Golston take a lot of these snaps just to get through preseason games.
Yeah, for sure. And Neville Gallimore used to be that guy that was so bad that it was, but yeah, I
he used to be. I mean, but I thought Gallimore, to his credit, I thought he had a pretty good preseason. I really do.
I think he's improved. I think he looked better than he did last year. I just don't know if it's too little too late at this point. I just, and I still don't know that I like him better than, those guys we just talked about, Fajoku or Golston, but I do think he's improved. So there's that.
All right, let's talk about a couple skilled players on offense that could be still fighting for a spot on the 53-man roster. We will get to them next. All right, Landon, let's run through several players here really quickly. Jalen Brooks had a fantastic training camp. It was okay the preseason. I thought he had a really nice grab last week, but for that number 6 wide receiver spot, do you think he ultimately makes the 53-man roster?
I do. I mean, I look, he's done everything that you could ask of him to do, short of lighting up preseason games. But he was, just as much of a training camp star as Jalen Tolbert at different points, just at a different tier. Just catching every single thing, making big plays at seemingly every single day in training camp. Look, I mean, it's a hard world, and it's a hard cut down day in NFL. So I guess it's possible because there's just so many talented players in this team. But
there are a lot of down roster wide receivers that I just don't think he's going to get claimed by anybody.
Yeah, I think it's possible, but I mean, if anybody was paying even a little bit of attention to Cowboys training camp, I mean, I wouldn't be shocked if someone took a flyer on him simply because like there's a lot of upside there, and I feel like he could play special teams as well. So I just feel bad because what if he doesn't make the team? It really does make you feel like, well what do you got to do, like to
Yeah.
make the roster as a sixth, seventh round undrafted free agent wide receiver. He's basically done every single thing they've asked him to do consistently at a high level, even with the ones. So it's like it's tough if he
I
doesn't.
want to
make it.
ask you about two other receivers just really quickly. Neither of these guys are going to make the 53-man roster. Dennis Houston, I actually thought
Yeah.
he looked better. I think you and I both agree he's going to be on the practice squad again this year.
Oh
Right?
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Simi Fehoko, just never clicked in the preseason. Do you think the Cowboys? He's going to get through waivers. I'm just telling you right now. But is it worth keeping him on the practice squad, or do you think you've kind of gone as far as you can go here?
No, I think it's worth keeping him. I think he has some value there. I mean, I don't think he's. I mean, I think he's gotten better. It's just everyone else around him just had incredible camps. Jalen Brooks and Jalen Tolbert are two of the stars of camp.
I know.
And so they just ended up eating up all of the targets, and they got all the looks. And then did Simi get banged up? I can't remember in the middle of a little bit,
But
and then that missed some time, and that hurts him. It's like when those guys are already kicking into fifth gear and you can't get out of third, it's like
I just wonder how many receivers you're going to keep on the practice squad, and if it comes down to like Dontario Drummond or Simi Fehoko, I don't know which way they go.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's fair. I mean, I think Drummond's a different type of receiver, and maybe could be an interesting special teams piece. So I actually think that now that you suggested Dontario Drummond's name, I'm going to suggest that they take him over, because even watching the game on Saturday, it felt like, okay, Drummond's that guy that's like 1 year away. Like he needed one more off season to kind of be in the competition next year, right?
It feels like Drummond could be somebody that comes in like next year and it's like, okay, he's our wide receiver 4. He's going to catch everything. He can play in the slot. He can play in the outside.
He was in the program all off season, came in every single day. Really taking a step like that.
If we need to get through a game as him being our third receiver, it's going to be fine. But I just don't know if you can trust Fehoko to do that right now.
Yeah, it's a lot of inconsistency right now, and he has some skills that are different than everybody else, but I don't know if it's enough.
Running back, Deuce Vaughn is making the team. He didn't even play on Saturday, which tells you everything you need to know.
And neither did Dowdle, which pretty much seals the deal for him as well.
So my question is, does Malik Davis make the 53-man roster? Is he a cut?
He's a cut on my roster. I think he's had a pretty good camp. It feels like he lost steam a little bit near the end, or at least that Dowdle just took that job and it was clear that it was his.
Which is crazy that Malik Davis goes from RB3 last year, then you move on from Zeke, and now he's off the roster. That's just kind of the way it's going to work out, it looks like.
That's the way the NFL is, unfortunately. So, and I think, the question is now more like, do they keep Lipke, And I think that I have them keeping him, but that's probably, just because it's me. But I mean, the truth of the matter is I feel pretty confident that both Davis and Lipke would clear waivers and revert to the practice squad if you need to.
Yeah, I think there's only one spot for Hunter Lipke and Sean McEwen to make the 53-man roster. My guess is McEwen is going to make it to start the year. And then we'll see how Lipke develops. We'll see how Luke Schoonmaker develops as a blocker, because if Schoonmaker can eventually replace what McEwen is doing as a blocker, or Peyton Hendershot can do it, then you can cut McEwen and bring up Lipke and help you give you something else on game day as a runner. But until then, we probably need McEwen at least for the first month or so.
Yeah, I mean, even though McEwen isn't in my initial 53, I have him being signed on the other side of week 1. And I agree. I think that you probably have Lipke as your game day call up, for a couple weeks, right? I think you've got like 4 of those from a practice squad player. And then once he exhausts that, you start to make a decision on, is it time to start calling him up to the regular roster? And then what do you do there? Those sort of situations usually work themselves out due to injury. So I just think that's why we're comfortable with having some of these guys that we want to play on the team on the practice squad is because you get these call-ups, and that really kind of gives you a lot of flexibility there.
Last thing before we go. I just want a totally random player that you wouldn't be absolutely floored if they made the 53-man roster. Like somebody that just nobody's talking about right now, that if you made the roster, you could have been like, yeah, I can see it. I got
Earl
one.
Earl Bostic. How about that?
Earl Bostic.
Here's the deal, right? He's a down roster offensive tackle in a league that is sorely missing tackles, right? He's on a team that, the Cowboys that kind of have some pretty decent depth at the position. You have a couple different guys that you like. And if you feel like he has the traits that are developable and that he's close enough to that kind of area where you feel like you could even put him in the game, maybe you hold on to him just to protect him, right? And just because you're just hoarding offensive linemen, you don't want to let any of them go. I'm not saying that I think I'm certainly not putting him on my roster, but I think if we're talking about a true surprise, like we've talked about all the guys that are like, kind of close but no cigar guys potentially, right? But if we're talking about a true shocker, I would think it would have to come from an offensive line spot or I guess probably not defensive back, right? Because you have a lot of those. Probably not defensive line.
I got one for you at defensive back.
Let's hear it.
I'm not going to be totally shocked if Josh Butler makes the 53-man roster. Number 40.
Mm-hmm. I know. Yeah.
Well, just for our listeners.
For our listeners. Yeah.
Battled his butt off in the preseason.
Yeah,
now, it wasn't always great, but it's clear that Al Harris, the Cowboys secondary coach, likes him quite a bit. Somebody who was, I believe, was it the XFL or USFL? One of those two leagues played in. I don't know. I just think there's something about him that the Cowboys like. Played on the outside quite a bit. Was a pretty good tackler. If they end up moving on from a Kelvin Joseph or something like that, maybe, or a Nahshon Wright, maybe it's Josh Butler who makes the roster instead.
Man, well, can I ask you a real quick follow-up? Do you have Eric Scott on your roster?
Yeah.
So, okay, well, in this case, you would say that they take both Eric Scott or do you think in this surprise scenario they reach past Eric Scott and
reach past him? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's possible. He certainly had a.
Again, we're talking about this is pretty shocking, but I don't know. There's always one or two players that we just never thought of making the 53-man roster.
That's true.
Wind up on there.
I mean, I think you and I just named two folks that would be very surprising, but again, at key positions that are valuable. So you try to keep those guys at those positions that are hard to acquire. Offensive line and defensive backs are definitely one of them.
I was looking at the linebacker position. Could they sneak a linebacker in there that we haven't talked about? And then I watched Tyra Sweet's linebacker tape, and no thanks.
No, thank you.
All right. That is it for today's show. We want to thank you for making Locked On Cowboys your first listen of the day. Again, everydayers, we'll be back tomorrow to break down all the moves that the Cowboys made before the cut down day. So make sure you do tune in for that. Follow the show on YouTube. We are free and available on all platforms. Go follow Landon on Twitter at McCoolBCB. I'm at Marcus_Mosher. And we'll see you next time.